In the 90s, Amber Valletta was everywhere. She was walking the biggest runways, fronting campaigns for luxury brands, and gracing over 40 Vogue covers. She wasn't just another model, she was the supermodel. But then, she disappeared. Behind the flashing cameras and million-dollar contracts, Amber was hiding something. Something that had been with her long before the fashion world even knew her name. A secret that nearly cost her everything. The pressure, the fast life, the endless parties. No one knew what was really happening behind the scenes until she walked away. This is the story of Amber Valletta, the supermodel who almost disappeared. Amber Valletta's story didn't begin in the fashion capitals of Paris or Milan. It began in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a place far from the glamour and chaos of the fashion world. She wasn't born into fame, she wasn't surrounded by wealth, she was just a regular small-town girl raised in a working-class family with no connection to the industry that would one day make her a star. Her childhood was ordinary, but not always easy. Growing up in the Midwest, she had big dreams, but modeling wasn't one of them. In fact, if you had told 14-year-old Amber that she would one day walk for Versace and Prada, she probably wouldn't have believed you. But as fate would have it, Amber was scouted by a local modeling agency at just 15 years old. She had never considered modeling before, but with her high cheekbones, piercing blue-green eyes, and an effortless, almost regal elegance, she was impossible to ignore. With her mother's encouragement, Amber was soon booking local jobs, posing for small-time catalogs, and regional campaigns. But Tulsa wasn't exactly a fashion capital, and it quickly became clear. If she wanted to make it, she had to leave. So, at just 17 years old, Amber made a decision that would change everything. She packed her bags, said goodbye to the only life she had ever known, and boarded a flight to Europe, the epicenter of high fashion. When Amber arrived in Paris, she had no idea what to expect. She was still just a teenager, a girl from Oklahoma suddenly thrown into a world of haute couture, flashing cameras, and billion-dollar fashion houses. But she didn't just fit in. She stood out. Her first breakthrough came with Steven Meisel, one of the most influential photographers in the industry. Meisel, known for shaping the careers of models like Linda Evangelista and Naomi Campbell, saw something in Amber that was different. She wasn't just beautiful. She had a presence, an effortless sophistication that felt both modern and timeless. It wasn't long before the biggest designers in the world were calling. In 1993, she shot her first cover for Vogue, an achievement that most models could only dream of. And it was only the first of many. By the time the 90s were in full swing, Amber had graced over 40 Vogue covers, becoming one of the most in-demand models of her era. She was walking for Versace, Calvin Klein, Chanel, and Valentino. She became the face of Giorgio Armani and Prada, fronting campaigns that defined an entire generation of fashion. One of her most iconic moments came when she became the face of Elizabeth Arden's Red Door fragrance. The campaign, shot in dramatic black and white, showcased Amber's striking features and effortless grace. She wasn't just a model, she was a muse. The industry couldn't get enough of her. Her ethereal beauty, her ability to transform in front of the camera, her natural elegance. She had all the makings of a supermodel. By the time she turned 20, Amber Valletta was a household name in fashion. But while the world was celebrating her, she was hiding a secret. One that had been with her since childhood, because Amber's struggles didn't start in the fashion industry. They started long before she ever set foot on a runway. And soon, they would catch up with her. On the surface, Amber Valletta had it all. She was making millions, traveling the world, and living the kind of life that most people could only dream of. But she was hiding a secret that stood with her since her childhood. Growing up, Amber had a childhood that, to outsiders, seemed normal. But underneath the surface, there was a darkness that she kept hidden. In an interview, Amber admitted that she had her first drink at just 8 years old. By 10, she was already experimenting with drugs and alcohol long before she ever set foot on a runway. Most kids were still playing outside, worrying about homework. But Amber, she was already drinking. She wasn't sneaking sips at a family party. She was drinking to numb something deeper, something she couldn't put into words. Amber later admitted that she was predisposed for it. It was in her blood, in her genetics, something lurking beneath the surface waiting. But addiction isn't just about biology. It's about pain. It's about needing something to quiet the noise, to dull the fear, to feel just a little bit more in control. And for Amber, that need started early. She had spoken about feeling lost, scared, sad, and lonely as a child. Emotions that didn't go away. Emotions that pushed her towards substances long before she even knew what addiction was. She didn't drink or get high because it was fun. She did it because it made her feel safe. And by the time she was a teenager, it had already become a part of her. So when the fashion world came calling, when she was suddenly thrown into a world of flashing cameras, high expectations, and endless pressure, she didn't stand a chance. Most people assume that addiction in models starts with the industry. The pressure to stay thin, the late night parties, the fast life. And while all of that poured gasoline onto the fire, Amber's addiction was already burning. Modeling didn't start her struggles, but it was about to make them impossible to ignore. Amber really thought she had it all in control. She showed up, smiled, and posed effortlessly, while still under the influence of both drugs and alcohol. But addiction has always a way of catching up to you. One day, Amber had landed a multi-million-dollar campaign, one of the biggest deals of her career. The kind of job that solidified a model's place in the industry. The kind of job that was supposed to be effortless for someone like her. But that morning, she was a mess. The night before had spiraled out of control. Another party, another round of drinking, another attempt to quiet the noise in her head. But this time, it didn't wear off by the morning. She was still drunk, still high. She told herself she could pull it together. She had done it before. But the moment she stepped onto set, she felt the weight of everything at once. The blinding lights, the camera flashing, the creative director speaking so fast she could barely understand. She could feel their eyes on her, their expectations. And for the first time in her career, she couldn't perform. The details of that day are hazy even to Amber herself. She doesn't remember everything, just pieces. The crew whispered. The photographer is trying to adjust the lighting, buying time. Someone asked if she was okay. God knows she wasn't. This wasn't just a bad day. This wasn't just one too many drinks the night before. This was the moment she realized she was losing everything. That night, when she was alone, she faced the truth she had been running from for years. She was an addict. And if she didn't stop now, she never would. For the first time, Amber Valletta decided to walk away from fashion. No press release, no final farewell photo shoot, no carefully worded goodbye. She just disappeared. The industry barely noticed at first. Models came and went all the time. There was always another face, another rising star. If she was gone, someone else would take her place. But for Amber, this wasn't about the industry anymore. It was about staying alive. She checked herself into rehab, cutting herself off from the world she had known for so long. She wasn't just leaving fashion. She was leaving the version of herself that had been trapped for decades. For the first time since she was 8 years old, Amber was completely sober. And for the first time, she had no idea what came next. Amber Valletta should have been another cautionary tale. A supermodel who burned out, disappeared, and became a name people only whispered about in the past tense. But instead, She became a comeback story. After years of stepping away from the spotlight, Amber slowly made her way back into the industry. But this time, it wasn't about being the hottest new face. It was about being herself. For most models, the industry is cruelly unforgiving once they hit their late 20s. The fashion world is always looking for the next young star, always cycling through phases, replacing one icon with another. But Amber was different. Instead of being forgotten, she landed major campaigns for Prada, Stella McCartney, and Balenciaga. She walked runways with the same effortless grace that made her famous in the first place. She wasn't just proving that she still belonged in high fashion. She was proving that true supermodels never go out of style. At an age when most models had been pushed aside, she was being embraced again. But this time, she wasn't just walking for the biggest designers. She was using her platform for something bigger. Amber Valletta knew firsthand how destructive the fashion industry could be. She had spent years in a world that rewarded excess, pushed people past their limits, and discarded them the moment they became inconvenient. She had nearly lost herself to it, and now she was determined to change it. Amber became one of fashion's leading voices in sustainability, working with brands to rethink how clothes were made, sourced, and marketed. She partnered with environmental organizations to push brands toward eco-conscious and ethical production. She worked with luxury fashion labels to help them transition into using sustainable materials, ethical supply chains, and reducing waste. She became a brand ambassador for Kering, the company that owns Gucci, Balenciaga, and Saint Laurent, to advocate for responsible fashion. And most importantly, she spoke out. She was no longer hiding her past, pretending everything had been glamorous. She was openly talking about addiction, recovery, and the toxic pressures placed on models. She gave raw, unfiltered interviews about what she had been through, about how addiction nearly cost her everything, about how the fashion industry looked the other way, about how she had to fight to save her life. She was no longer just a model. She was a force for change. Amber Valletta's return wasn't just about reclaiming her career. It was about redefining it. She had gone from being a young girl addicted to substances before she even knew what addiction was, to a global supermodel battling demons behind the scenes, to a woman who rebuilt her life and took back control. She wasn't just an ex-supermodel who got clean and made a quiet return to the industry. She transformed herself. She proved that addiction doesn't have to be the end of a story, that you can lose yourself and still find your way back, that you can come back stronger, wiser, and more powerful than ever. She should have disappeared. Instead, she became unstoppable. And that's why, even after decades in the industry, Amber Valletta is still standing, a supermodel, a survivor, a force to be reckoned with, and the woman who refused to be forgotten.